peace is common in most languages. People can talk about peace treaties or times of peace. It means the absence of war. And in the Bible, the word peace can refer to the absence of conflict, but it also points to the presence of something better in its place. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. And in the New Testament, the Greek word is eirene. The most basic meaning of shalom is complete or whole. The word can refer to a stone that has a perfect, whole shape with no cracks. It can also refer to a completed stone wall that has no gaps and no missing bricks. Shalom refers to something that's complex with lots of pieces that's in a state of completeness, wholeness. It's like Job, who says his tents are in a state of shalom because he counted his flock and no animals are missing. This is why shalom can refer to a person's well-being. Like when David visited his brothers on the battlefield, he asked about their shalom. The core idea is that life is complex, full of moving parts and relationships and situations, and when any of these is out of alignment or missing, your shalom breaks down. Life is no longer whole, it needs to be restored. In fact, that's the basic meaning of shalom when you use it as a verb. To bring shalom literally means to make complete or restore. So Solomon brings shalom to the unfinished temple when he completes it. Or if your animal accidentally damages your neighbor's field, you shalom them by giving them a complete repayment for their loss. You take what's missing and you restore it to wholeness. The same goes for human relationships. In the book of Proverbs, to reconcile and heal a broken relationship is to bring shalom. And when rival kingdoms make shalom in the Bible, it doesn't just mean they stop fighting, it also means they start working together for each other's benefit. This state of shalom is what Israel's kings were supposed to cultivate, and it rarely happened. So the prophet Isaiah, he looked forward to a future king, a prince of shalom. And his reign would bring shalom with no end. A time when God would make a covenant of shalom with his people and make right all wrongs and heal all that's been broken. This is why Jesus' birth in the New Testament was announced as the arrival of eirene. Remember, that's the Greek word for peace. Jesus came to offer his peace to others, like when he said to his followers, "My peace I give to you all." The apostles claimed that Jesus made peace between messed up humans and God when he died and rose from the dead. The idea is that he restored to wholeness the broken relationship between humans and their creator. This is why the Apostle Paul can say Jesus himself is our eirene. He was the whole complete human that I am made to be but have failed to be. And now he gives me his life as a gift. And this means that Jesus' followers are now called to create peace. Paul instructed local churches to keep their unity through the bond of peace, which requires humility and patience and bearing with others in love. Becoming people of peace means participating in the life of Jesus, who reconciled all things in heaven and earth, restoring peace through his death and resurrection. So peace takes a lot of work, because it's not just the absence of conflict. True peace requires taking what's broken and restoring it to wholeness, whether it's in our lives, our relationships, or in our world. And that's the rich biblical concept of peace.
There was a 200-year period in history that was just an epic period. It was between about the time of 20 BC and 180 AD. It began with Emperor Caesar Augustus, and when he came to power, and it ended when Emperor Marcus Aurelius fell from power. Emperor Marcus Aurelius was called the last of the good emperors. So imagine if you were the next emperor. You're like the first of the bad emperors. That's not who I want to be. The historians have described this time as a golden kind of age, or a miracle age. Because in this age, things happened that had never happened before then. And people looked at this age with awe at what was going on. There was more stability during this time. There was more security that people felt. The borders of the Roman Empire expanded farther than they ever had before. In fact, the Roman Empire during this time had 70 million people, or grew to have 70 million people, which was about a third of the entire world's population, just in their area, because there was such stability and there was such security there. It even allowed for lots of enduring projects to happen that we still see today. Things like Hadrian's Wall, things like the Colosseum, the Roman roads. I mean, these were the things that were built during this period because it was a period of such prosperity, a period of such growth and education and architectural enhancements. So many things were happening during this period. The age has been described as tranquil because it saw a pause between wars that happened before and wars that happened later on. It was described by Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of this period. He said, "I found a city of brick, and I left it one of marble." So, he felt like I changed this place from one that was just junky to one that was beautiful. And this is the period of time that's popularly called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And people look at this as the idyllic time in the time of the Roman world. There's a time of peace. So are we living in a time of peace? Relax. Is America at peace? Are we at peace? Are you at peace? I want us to be at peace. I want to be at peace. Did you catch from the video what peace really is? This lasting, enduring kind of peace. Because, everybody thinks about peace. Everybody wants peace. I don't think I've ever met anybody who doesn't want some sort of peace. I mean, peace for ourselves, or peace for our world, or peace for our jobs, or peace for our souls, or peace for something. But we all want some kind of peace. And usually that's the kind of peace that we can make happen. Like, we can work for that peace. We've got to try harder to get that peace. We've got to arrange circumstances and talk to the right people and do the right things to get that kind of peace. And that's good. That's a good kind of peace. But this peace that the video was talking about, the peace that comes from the Bible, the peace that God wants to bring us, it's a bit different. Because although it is all those things, it's more. And that's the more kind of peace that I think God wants to bring to us. It's the peace of completion, and the peace that everything's okay even when it's not okay. It's the peace that even though I don't see it yet, I know it still will happen. It's that kind of peace that can last, that kind of peace that can endure through anything. So I want that kind of peace, and I want that kind of peace for you. And if we have that kind of peace, what do we do? In other words, what do peaceful people do? What does it look like to have that kind of peace? Well, last week we started talking about King Ahaz. And King Ahaz was this scared and defiant king of the nation of Judah, which was the southern of the two nations of Israel and Judah. And we talked about how he was defiant against even God's attempts to bring hope to him during this time of total unrest. And God even went as far as to bring the prophet Isaiah to give him hope. And in this whole episode, in this whole life of King Ahaz, who really was a 20 or 30-something-year-old king at the time that all this happened, even during all these attempts and all these things that were happening during his life, this is where we find God's promises that we quote and pull out every year during Advent about Jesus. The first one that comes up during his life is when God says, "The young woman will conceive a child, she will give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. And the whole point of Isaiah and of God promising this is they're saying, look, God's going to do something impossible right in front of you so that you can believe that God can do the impossible things that are going on in your life. So if you see evidence here, then maybe you can take a step of faith to say, yeah, okay, God, you can do these things that are not good in my life. Well, King Ahaz refused once again to believe that God could do these things, and so God tells him all the terrible things that are going to befall him. And it's worse and worse, and it's uglier and uglier as time goes on. And if he continues to refuse, he's putting himself in a real bind. Things are just going to get worse and worse. And he's described as somebody who has darkness about him. Somebody who's living even in an age of darkness. And that whole metaphor of he's living in darkness was this picture of what people live in when they're not at peace. They feel dark, and it looks dark, and you do things that you do in the dark, which is not be able to see and not be able to do the things that we're otherwise free to do. Now, enough of this Ahaz stuff, enough of this darkness stuff, enough of this defiant stuff. This is supposed to be about peace. So where's the peace? Let's find some peace. So here's what Isaiah says next. This is the next promise that Isaiah gives after all this stuff. And he says, nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali will be humbled, but there will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which lies along the road that runs between the Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. So let's get our bearings here. Remember, we were talking about Israel and Judah last week, northern and southern kingdoms of God's people. And now we're talking about these two tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, which we don't talk about that often. But why do they come up in a promise about Jesus that we talk about every year and we quote every year, but usually we pass over this part of it because Zebulun and Naphtali are too popular and they don't make a lot of sense. So what's the deal with these two tribes? Well, when God brought the people back into the promised land, this is the time of Moses, after the time of Moses, in the time of Joshua, they come into the promised land, and eventually God gives them that whole land, and God divides it up between the 12 tribes of God's people. So we could think of them as the original homesteaders. They homesteaded the promised land. And God divided it up. So he said, okay, Dan, you get this part, and Zebulun, you get this part. And so he divided up between all the 12 tribes. Zebulun and Naphtali get those two regions up in the top, which are in the northern part. They're between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea, near the Jordan River, and where it flows down to the sea. This was an area very much like the Central Valley. It was fertile. It was rich in farmland. And this was the area where people would fish and they would grow crops to feed lots of the other regions who couldn't do those things. So this was valuable territory. The problem with the area of Zebulun and Naphtali is they were a region of darkness. Everybody, when they talked about Zebulun and Naphtali in other places, they would talk about them as not believing God, not following God, being against God, worshiping other gods, doing all the things that the people of God are not supposed to do. And so they were looked at as a region of darkness. Now, does this sound like a place that's full of peace? No, this isn't a place full of peace. This is full of darkness. Does this sound like a time of peace? No. Isaiah uses this region, this area, who everybody knew was total darkness, as an example of the impossible thing that God was going to do. Because what does he say? Even this region that's in darkness will be filled with glory. Now, if you're somebody in their day who knows the reputation of Zebulun and Naphtali, and somebody says they're once going to be filled with glory, you're like, come on. They can't be filled with glory. They're like the opposite of glory. They're dark. They can't be filled with glory. And Isaiah's like, oh, hold on. God can do even that. And if God can do even that, guess what God can do? So Isaiah keeps going. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of... His government and its peace will never end. A child who brings peace that will never end? I mean, this is like the opposite of their world and of these people. Could that really be? See, to Ahaz and to all those people, that seemed impossible to them. And to us, when things feel very peaceless, it feels impossible that there can be peace. Well, about 700 years after all of that, there were some shepherds who were out in their fields keeping watch over their flocks at night. And what happened to these shepherds? Well, an angel came, which was odd. These shepherds were doing their shepherd work in the same area that King Ahaz lived and reigned. They were doing their work in the same area where Isaiah was doing his work and prophesying about the dark becoming glorified and all these impossible things kind of happening. And shepherds, shepherds are not exactly the most high-ranking people in the world. I mean, shepherds were necessary, but shepherds were laborers. They were doing the work that a lot of people didn't want to do, but still needed to get done. So we have these kind of low-class shepherds who get an angel coming to them. Now, an angel is kind of like, a messenger of God. And an angel is not too far off from a prophet. A prophet maybe like Isaiah, who did this work in the same land, trying to bring God's message to the same area of people. So, in Luke, we see what actually happened to the shepherds. So it says, suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified. But the angel reassured them, don't be afraid. He said, I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth lying in a manger. Now, these shepherds are probably the last people in the world who would expect to get a message from God via angel. You've got low-class shepherds, and angels are kind of high-class. They're like as close to God as you can get. They're the beings who are sort of with God. They're up there. God's up there. And God's message is up there. And God's peace is up there. And the shepherds are like down here. So it's a long way between the two. But they get the message anyway. And after they get the message, then a bunch more angels show up. And what do those angels say? They say, glory to God in the highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased. Now, if we were angels, I think we would naturally start that way. What a more natural way to start out a message. Glory to God in the highest. I mean, they're with God. They kind of know God. They know that God's got everything, and they're here because of God. So glory to God. I mean, praise God. That's the way to start. But I'm not sure that we would say the second part. Because peace isn't here. It's there. And we haven't seen peace here in a long time. And most of what we know is pretty dark. So how could there be peace here? But they say peace is now here on earth. It's not just there, it's now suddenly here. And the sign they get, the thing where God gets signs to prove that I'm going to do this impossible thing so that you can believe this impossible thing, their sign is there's a baby who was born wrapped in strips of cloth lying in a manger. So what do the shepherds do? Do they believe the sign? Yeah, they go see the sign. They trust it. They say, well, God, if you did this, okay, we're going to go see the sign. If they saw the sign of the impossible thing that could have happened, maybe they could believe the other thing, like peace could actually come to earth. I mean, could it be that God could bring the impossible thing to earth? I want the kind of peace that's here, that's now. I don't want to wait for peace. I want it to be here now. And the angels actually say that peace can be here now. So what do people who are filled with that kind of peace do? Well, first thing is, I think peaceful people wait on God. If the stretch between the world of Isaiah and the world of the shepherds and the angels and Jesus show us anything, it's that peaceful people can wait on God. God's promises don't come as quick as a text message, unfortunately. And God's promises don't always come through in the time that we want. But God teaches us that it's okay sometimes to wait. Hopefully not 700 years, but it's okay to wait. As the Psalm 27 says, wait patiently for the Lord, be brave and courageous, yet, yes, wait patiently for the Lord. The reason I like that psalm especially is because it's more real than just saying, just be patient. Just wait. You'll have peace. It's boldly and courageously wait for God. Because it's so hard to wait for God to bring peace, isn't it? It takes boldness and it takes courage to be able to wait with faith that God is going to bring peace. Waiting can sometimes be okay. Peaceful people also live like peace is here. I mean, of course, God's peace is not entirely here. God's peace is just sort of here. Jesus was the Prince of Peace who brought peace, but it's sort of like he brought the beginning of peace. He brought the start of a new kind of peace. Like he brought the start of new knowledge. We can have more understanding because of Jesus, or we can have more wisdom because of Jesus, or we can have more guidance because of Jesus. We don't have it all. We don't have everything, but we can have the beginning of it. We can have more and some of it. But it's also the promise that there's more coming. And it's not just now, but it's started. So peaceful people live like peace is actually here. Just like the shepherds did when they heard the promise. They went and they followed that promise, that impossible thing. They went to see that baby because they believed that the peace was here now. So they went to see it in real life. And what if we live like peace is here now? Like Hebrews says, faith is the assurance of things we hope for and the evidence of things we do not see. It's hard to not see it, but still live like it's here. Peaceful people live like peace is here now. Peaceful people also know who brings peace. The kind of peace that the Bible talks about is not the kind of peace that you and I can make happen or we can bring. It's not a peace that we do. It's lasting, it's complete, it's sure, it's forever. It's big kind of peace. And most of the time when the Bible talks about peace, and there are hundreds and hundreds of times when it talks about peace, most of the time when it talks about peace, it talks about God bringing the peace. It's almost never about people making peace or people doing it. It's about God's peace or God bringing that kind of peace. In the New Testament, we get kind of a bigger picture, and actually a really interesting picture of peace. It shows how peace comes in several different places and from kind of the completion of God. So it says there's peace of God, which surpasses our understanding, which Jean Marie read. There's the peace of Christ, which can take over and rule in our hearts. And then there's the peace that comes from living with the Spirit, as one of the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, it's kind of like a full circle peace. It's an all-encompassing peace. It's a full meal peace. I mean, this is full peace that God can bring. A gentleman named Hugh Welchel is the leader of a nonprofit group on the East Coast, and he was reflecting on the biblical type of peace, and this is what he said. Every person has a powerful, relentless drive to experience shalom through right relationships with God, with our families, with our communities, and with the physical creation. This is because shalom was God's original design in creation, and restoration of shalom is his design in redemption. We're made to experience peace. I mean, God doesn't mean for us to wait to experience peace. God is building it in to the relationship that we can have with God now. So may the Lord bless us and keep us. May the Lord turn his face to shine upon us, to be gracious to us. May the Lord turn his face toward us and give us his peace. Let's pray.